Next address is from Bob Gordon. Bob's the Managing Director of Forestry Tasmania. It's based in Hobart. FT is a government business enterprise which has the responsibility for managing 1.5 million hectares of state forest land. That's 39% of Tasmanian forests. If anyone's followed the debate, I guess you'd understand why Bob is a central player or a central figure in a lot of the issues that have come out of Tasmania. So he's very experienced in the field from a different perspective, but understanding the issues that challenge us up here and challenge us in the work that we're trying to do. Bob's also been instrumental in coming up here and initially working with Jack Thompson and others in a unique Garma partnership, establishing a way forward that has led to the work that you'll see around you with the timber and the employment, and it's then led to the social benefits. I'll let him tell you about some of that stuff. Please make him welcome.
Thanks, Sean. I'd also like to pay my respect to the traditional owners, past and present. I should point out I'm up here on holidays at the moment, so any thing I may say is a personal view, not necessarily that of Forestry Tasmania. As Sean said, FT's a government business enterprise, a bit like Qantas and the Commonwealth Bank and Telstra were before they were sold off by Labor governments. We normally turn over about $200 million a year, most of which is exported to Japan, China, Korea, and increasingly to the US. You probably wonder why Forestry Tasmania is up in Arnhem Land. Basically, it's because when Galarrwuy first talked about having a timber project up here, he and a few other people checked out what companies were around that might be able to offer training, practical experience, skill sets in both forestry and in timber processing. And for some reason they come up with Forestry Tasmania, as we're probably about the only full-service forest company left in Australia after the collapse of the managed investment schemes. I noticed the title of the conference is The Resources Boom, but it probably should have been titled The Mining Boom, because the rest of the resource industries in Australia are actually suffering because of the mining boom. And they're suffering because we've got a high Australian dollar, the skills are being drained from the rest of Australia into the mining areas, and those of us that are either in the export industry or competing with imports are suffering because of the high Australian dollar. If Australia happened to be split into two countries, one country was Queensland, Northern Territory and Queensland, and the other country was the rest of Australia, the Northern Territory Queensland country would have an exchange rate of probably $1.40 to a US dollar, and the rest of Australia would have an exchange rate of about 75 cents to a US dollar. So because of that, the traditional manufacturing industries, forestry, fishing and agriculture are all struggling with a very high Australian dollar, which is held up because of our high interest rates and because of the mining boom. And again, when I talk about resources, when you go to forestry school at ANU to do your forestry degree, the first thing you're taught is to think a bit longer term than, well, firstly most politicians, but generally more than other industries. So when we do our resource modelling, we do it for between 200 and 1,000 years. So foresters think in terms of generations of trees. We don't think in as long a term as the traditional owners here who've been here for 50,000 years, but we're getting close. And one of the things about mines is they do shut and they do end. And to me, one of the biggest challenges of the mining boom is we have two options. We could end up with a few big holes in the ground, some people who have earned some consumption money along the way, and not much else except maybe some leftover mining infrastructure. Or we could use the infrastructure that's been provided by the mining boom, whether it's roads or skills or markets, to use that to invest in the future and have a sustainable future for communities that need to find economic activity after the mining boom. And again, if you use this area as an example, I don't know what the life of the mine is. I suspect they've probably got bauxite reserves proved for another 20 or so years. But 20 years isn't very long in terms of a community like this. What has the mine provided? It's provided infrastructure, a port, roads in the town, although I had the pleasure of driving in from Katherine. I'm not sure I'd describe the road as a road, Nigel. It was pretty terrible. We own and build, or we have about 10,000 kilometres of road, mostly gravel roads, which we maintain for our forest production. And the road I've just driven in on wouldn't meet our minimum standards for any of our roads. And it's a severe constraint on what you can do up here, in my view. You've also got machinery, buildings, electricity, and potentially housing. What's the potential? I did a few quick sums, and if you just looked at the forestry potential, the stuff I know most about, and we just look at this area, there's probably about 100 jobs that could be here forever, because forestry is about forever. It's about rotations for as long as you can think of. And in those jobs, you'd probably have about 15 in sawn timber, about 20 potentially in making furniture, about another 20 in veneer and plywood manufacture, and about 20 in bioenergy. As you're probably aware, up here, all of the electricity is generated from fossil fuels, either from bunker oil or diesel. It costs a fortune. I don't know what the average cost is. Rio probably won't tell me that, but I suspect it's probably $350 a megawatt hour. When you go back to your house and look at your electricity bill, you're probably paying about $100 a megawatt hour for your electricity. So people up here are paying 3-4 times the amount that most of the rest of Australia is paying for electricity, and it's all driven by fossil fuels. Just from the mine clearing, where you're probably aware in bauxite mining, they bulldoze over the trees, remove the soil, take out the bauxite, put back the soil, scatter seed, and the trees grow again. If you just use the timber from the bauxite clearing, there's enough potential here to have those sawmill jobs, to have the veneer mill, to have the furniture mill, and to have about 1 megawatt continuous of electricity, which in normal terms would be enough to service a town of a couple of thousand people. All you do is take the waste wood, gasify it, and then run it through either a diesel generator or special gas turbines. If you multiply that out, and we're dealing with people on Cape York who have a much bigger potential mine there, you're probably talking about through what I call the monsoon zone, where you've got all this Eucalyptus tetradonta forest, which stretches from about Cairns through to Kununurra, and it's about 150 kilometres wide. It's a huge area. You've probably got potential for several thousand long-term sustainable jobs. People have asked me, what's the market for the timber? Well, you're sitting in it. This is all Eucalyptus tetradonta, the logs and the beautiful timber behind us. If you look at the benches, if you look at where we had lunch and the benches around it, it's all tetradonta. It can be used for housing, it can be used for furniture, decking. The veneer can be used for plywood bracing for housing and for structural purposes. Why doesn't it happen? I've listed a few of the constraints that appear to apply not just in the Northern Territory but elsewhere. The first is when Gallaroy and I first sat down and talked about building a couple of houses just out of local timber, sawn by the local blokes and built by the local blokes. Other than Jack Thompson, I think just about everyone else said it was clearly not possible. It couldn't be done, it would never work. And we talked for a while about we could do one of two things. We could spend a lot of energy applying for government money to fund building a house, or we could build the house. So we decided it was less effort to build the house than it was to apply for the government money to build the house. Unfortunately, what we hadn't anticipated was that the house that people here built would be built before any of the government houses that they spent a couple of $1 billion on. And so there's a bit of embarrassment when the house was opened, because no government minister would come near it in case they were asked the question, how come the locals can build a house with no government money and you haven't built any houses with your couple of $1 billion yet? So if you haven't got a community with people like Galarrwuy and Ballapalla and Jawa, and with the support and resources that people like Klaus and Sean provide. And if you haven't got them saying something's possible, then there's lots and lots of people, many of them employed by the Commonwealth and Territory governments, who will tell you what you can't do. And we had everyone saying what we couldn't do, and very little support saying what we could do. The second thing is bureaucracy and red tape. We had a similar project out at Wadair, and all of the environmental permits said that the permit gave people the authority to destroy the vegetation, not to take it. And so you could burn the timber, but you weren't allowed to remove the logs and use them for sawmilling or other construction purposes, because that wasn't what the environmental permits said. The pipeline clearing out at Wadair was being done very quickly, and we were denied access to the pipeline clearing because the permit said we couldn't remove the vegetation from the corridor. Eventually, Martin Ferguson helped us and made a few phone calls, and eventually we got permission to remove the logs. The other thing is we deliver training up here, a registered training authority, and we had to get separate registration in Queensland and the Northern Territory from Tasmania, and that took us quite a bit of time and, again, money. The third problem was Green Party ideology. When Forestry Tasmania and the Gummidge clan signed an MOU, the first thing that happened was the Green Party launched an attack on it. I was actually asked a question by an ABC interviewer in Hobart. Was it true that the MOU in the Northern Territory was a secret plan to provide wood chips to a Tasmanian pulp mill? I laughed on the radio, which probably didn't help. Firstly, this species doesn't make pulp at all. Secondly, it's completely uneconomic to do anything with this timber up here other than to produce the highest value product you can, which at the moment is sawn timber. And when Forestry Tasmania entered into negotiations in good faith with the Tasmanian Aboriginal community to see whether it was possible to perhaps come to some sort of lease or land transfer arrangement for areas that were proposed to be put into reserves, a Tasmanian Green Minister launched an attack, and I'll paraphrase it, but she said something like, the poor Aboriginal people of Tasmania have been conned by Forestry Tasmania. As it happened, she was Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and had to publicly apologise for her condescending remarks. And the reason for that is that the Green Party believes that they are the only ones that has the right to decide how areas of forest should be managed, not the traditional owners. The other limiting factor is business skills and marketing skills, and I hope that's what, at least part of what Forestry Tasmania's provided. We could sell all of the timber that's behind you without even blinking. It's a high quality product. Those of you from southern states would probably love to have a deck or a floor or furniture made out of it. At the moment, most of the timber is going into local uses, whether it's building these facilities or decking or house building locally. But there's a huge potential. And if you add up, as I said before, the other sites in Australia where this is possible, I think you've got a substantial business, you've got a substantial industry, and unlike mining, it can go on forever. Thank you.